technical difficulties.
Anne Marie, I started the recording. It's recording.
You're set.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Father William Weary. I made the 36 Men's Curcio in 1984 in Jednota. I sat at St. John's table, and I'm pastor of Sacred Heart of Jesus Church, Lewistown, St. Jude Thaddeus Church, Mifflintown. Very happy to be here with you tonight. We are still traveling through the document of the Pastoral Constitution of the Church in the modern world, Gaudium et Spes, starting off with the words joy and hope in Latin. And we are now in chapter 3, economic and social life. The previous section is about culture. We read that already, got a royo on that. Industrialization, communication, leisure, urbanization, and the human responsibilities there are in all of those areas. This section is related, economic and social life. And again, this is unprecedented in church history, this level of commentary by the church on social life and on justice and on human interaction and interrelations. I mean, they're really digging deep into modern life and the human community. The chapter here first notes humankind's increasing domination over nature. Compare these comments to life in the world before the 1850s, let's say, when you had the rise of the factories and industrializations, push the rewind button. What we've experienced in the last 200 and some years is just incredible. The pace of modernization, the increase of technology from 1850 all the way back. I mean, the 1800s were not all that different from the 1600s, which were not all that different really from the 1200s to the 800s. But from the mid-19th century on, it's just been astronomical, and the council is commenting on that, stepping up to the plate to talk about it. And when the factories first started appearing, mass production, you began to have real issues in ethics and in social justice addressed by Pope Leo XIII in the encyclical late 1890s Rerum Novarum, which is Latin for about new things or of new things. What were the new things? Well, what I just said, industrialization, the rise of the factories, which were raising great moral issues in terms of labor and living wage and fairness toward the worker. I quote here from Gaudium et Spes: increased efficiency in production and improved methods of distribution of productivity and services have rendered the economy an instrument capable of meeting the increasing needs of the human family, unquote. That's true. I mean, there's a lot of good there. There's been a lot of distribution of goods and services, moving from the blacksmith shop and the carpentry shop in the village to the big factories. Pros and cons, however. And it says, quote, the picture is not without its disturbing elements, unquote. Luxury and misery exist side by side. There is not an equitable distribution of the fruits of productivity despite mass production of food. Some populations are nearly starving. This could endanger world peace, they say, could foment revolution and insurrection, which I think it did in Russia because of the vast poverty of the peasantry and the farmlands and all that, the communist revolution. It says, the document says there has to be a universal change in mentality and attitude across the board, across the world. And actually, the church, in a sense, has been calling for this for centuries, the gospel principles of justice and equity. That brings us to section 1 of the chapter entitled Economic Development in the Service of Humanity. And it says we should encourage economic and technical progress for the good of all, but it's not just about producing more goods, profit, and prestige. It's not all about more stuff, more money. I'm reminded of the Greek philosopher, I forget which one he was, who said he loved walking through, this is maybe centuries before Christ, he loved walking through the marketplace and seeing all the things that he didn't need. And that was liberal. Oh, look at that. That's nice. I don't need that. Oh, that's pretty. Don't need that either. Look at that. Sort of a liberation of freedom from acquisition and greed. Production is to be at the service of humanity, taking into account people's material needs and the requirements of their intellectual, moral, spiritual, and religious life in accordance with the moral order. And that is so true, that it's not, again, just about money or earning a living, but there should be consideration for the holistic view of life. For instance, I have objections to businesses that prevent people from going to church on Sunday. I think that's reprehensible. Management should allow for some work Saturday and Sunday, and not taking into account their intellectual, moral, spiritual, and religious life. Economic development must remain under the people's control. It is not to be left to the judgment of a few individuals or groups possessing too much economic power, nor to the political community alone, nor to a few powerful nations. There should be input there from the general citizenry, and it should not be an oligarchic whereby the top levels do everything. There's the example of in Latin America, there's some countries where just like 6 families, I think El Salvador, 6 powerful families own 80% of the land. And that is unjust. Saint Oscar Romero was addressing that, and he got assassinated for that. I'm thinking here of Saint Anthony Mary Claret in the late 1890s, Bishop of Santiago, Cuba. Amazing guy. He founded the Claretians, the Claretian order. They still exist. And he was coming up against the big sugar plantation owners, and they didn't like him. There were several assassination attempts against him because he was striving to get the farmers independent by growing their own gardens, both for their own sustenance and to sell on the open market. And they were sort of collectivizing in a way. He wrote, in addition to spiritual books, he wrote books about agriculture, about backyard gardening. And he came across much opposition for that. This chapter that we're in warns against excessive or unbridled capitalism and excessive collectivism as well. I quote, all citizens should remember that they have the right and duty to contribute according to their ability to the progress of their own community. They do not condemn capitalism. And the fathers of the council recognize, sharing, certain sharing of wealth on the other end of the spectrum. And they sort of try to hit it in the middle. It calls for an end to excessive economic and social differences. I'm quoting from the document directly now. Rural people must be helped to introduce necessary developments and innovations and to receive a fair return for their products, lest, as often happens, they remain second-class citizens. I know there's been a movement. You're all familiar with the 1,000 villages, stores that are around, one next to the Brothers restaurant on Route 15, and that's selling goods from the developing world at fair market prices, and instead of the rock bottom a cheap return that they've suffered in the past. And this movement is a worldwide movement to encourage people to create and to do their own crafts and to put them on the open market in these stores, in these shops that sell them at fair prices. Also, missionaries at times. I get the missionary magazines, many of you do as well, Maryknoll and Columban Fathers. And I'm impressed that in addition to the basic evangelization, they're very big on promoting methods of agriculture and helping with water projects and all that, and teaching the people to do those things. And we think of Peace Corps and Vista as well. Rural people, to do the quote again, must be helped to introduce necessary developments, innovations, and receive a fair return for their efforts. No discrimination in wages and working conditions against immigrant labor. The warning is issued. A tendency in some countries when the immigrants come in to, again, conscript them and employ them in slave wages. No one, especially public authorities, should treat such workers as simply mere instruments of production, but as persons. They should help them to attain decent housing conditions. I can't help but think here of Milton Hershey. Milton Hershey formed this model company town. We think of company towns sometimes as bad, like out of the Molly Maguires and some of the coal mining industries. But Milton Hershey formed this community of workers, but seeing to the education of the children and social life and cultural life as well. Really merits much study. He was not Catholic, his wife was Catholic, and they were married in the rectory of St. Patrick's Cathedral, New York City. With automation, sufficient alternative opportunities of employment should be available, and education in the new means of production. Timely for today. In the supermarkets now, it's hardly any live clerks anymore. Have you noticed that? Everything is all automated. I wonder what happened to so many of those people. So the document is saying there should be opportunities, alternative opportunities. I like to go to the live human being. I'm slowly learning how to do the automated checkout. But it's automation, and it's eliminating jobs. It's great. It's progress. But at the same time, it could be stress for others. Some principles here, section 2, governing economics and social life as a whole. Work, we're reminded, is holy. It's noble and helps to improve the human person. In the book of Genesis, in the Garden of Eden, before the fall, Adam is told to cultivate the garden. Cultivate the garden. So there was work before the fall. So it's not just a curse totally. It takes it, like everything else, it has an edge to it now with original sin. But there's a holiness to work where we are cooperating with God and nature in improving our surroundings. There's a reference here, of course, to Jesus and Joseph in the carpentry shop. They were teknons in Greek. Teknons, sometimes mostly translated carpenter, but could also be craftsmen. And they might have been doing more than just chairs and tables. They might have been renovating kitchens and stuff. I don't know. putting additions onto houses, maybe building houses. I don't know. Workers, it says here, should not be enslaved by their work. They should not be enslaved by their work. I remember years ago, I had a discussion with somebody else, or reminded to somebody, I remarked to somebody about how middle management people in retail, and maybe in restaurants too, have inhumanly long hours, so pay, and the top executives are getting their golf time in. The lower workers put their 8 hours a day in and go home, it just seemed to me those middle managers heading up departments, they're getting they're getting a base salary, they're not hourly, and they work just such long hours. And the other person said, "Hey, that's the free market system. That's capitalism. Let's get another job. They can take night courses or something like that and improve themselves." And I think the document is the other person, sort of a strict free market capitalist. The document seems to say, not good enough, not a satisfactory answer. And I quote, "The entire process of productive work then must be accommodated to the needs of the human person and the nature of his or her life, with special attention to domestic life, that of mothers of families in particular." And this isn't just a pipe dream. Think of the progress we've made in childcare and maternity leave and that sort of thing. And so that it is possible. Those sort of benefits now, when I was growing in the 50s, were unthinkable. And now we're doing that. The living wage is a no-brainer. People have to have a living wage. And I quote, "While devoting their time and energy to the performance of their work, they should nevertheless be allowed sufficient rest and leisure to cultivate their family, cultural, social, and religious life, a balanced life." Matthew Kelly, long ago, wrote a little paperback. His day job is a business consultant or a motivational speaker, Matthew Kelly. And I had a nephew who was working for Cutco Cutlery and selling for Cutco Cutlery. And they would have a big annual banquet and a keynote speaker. And there might be hundreds of people in the room with the young people who were the salespeople, along with their parents. And the keynote speaker was Matthew Kelly. This is about 30 years ago. And so he's a business guy. And he wrote a little book once about, I forget the name of it, about the ideal company. The ideal company. And it was very person-oriented, very work-oriented, very idealistic. But the CEOs would, bring the people in, sit them down and say, "What are your dreams? What are your dreams? What do you want out of life?" And they would say, "Well, geez, I'd like to get some college credits." And the boss says, "Okay, let's think about that. Let's formulate a plan." Stuff like that in the book. Very, very interesting. Co-responsibility in enterprise and in the economic system as a whole, and labor disputes. The active, quote, I'm quoting, "The active participation of everybody in administration is to be encouraged. While we respect management and administration, employees should have a say in decision-making. There is the right of the workers to unionize." The document Gaudium and Spes upholds that. "To form truly representative unions. Try to settle differences peaceably, but," quote, "the strike remains, even in today's conditions, a necessary, although an ultimate instrument for the defense of workers' rights and satisfaction of their lawful aspirations." So there is the right to strike as a last resort. Earthly goods, next section is entitled "Earthly Goods Destined for All." This is a principle, it's kind of an odd term, the universal destination of earthly goods. They talk about the universal destination of earthly goods. It sounds a bit like socialism or communism, whereby everybody owns everything, but it really isn't that. As we will see, private property is allowed by the church, but here we have a strong sense that what I have is for others, for the common good. In Catholic social justice teaching, common good is huge. That's very important term. I remember Dave Abel saying, he says this a lot, of Stewardship of Mission and Faith, the Ironstone Ranch. Dave Abel says he had a conversion moment, an epiphany, when somebody sparked his reversion to the faith, when somebody said to him, "Everything we have is given to us by God for the good of others. Everything we have is given to us by God for the good of others." It sounds like, Hallmark card. It just sounds like basic catechism, but bam, For some reason or other, it just hit him between the eyes, and it sparked his conversion or his deeper spirituality, because he was like, I get that, yeah, everything I have is for, I can enjoy what I have, but the common good, I want to make sure that it resonates throughout society. The poor and the deprived have a right to this world's goods. There has to be a reasonable distribution of this world's goods. There is a Catholic social, G.K. Chesterton. I have not studied it. G.K. Chesterton pushed it. Other Catholic writers, Catholic economic system called distributism. Distributism sounds, I don't know what it is, but it has something to do with an equitable distribution of wealth, I'm sure, in society, but it's not unbridled communism.
It promotes the most local control of resources.
Thank you.
So avoiding the conglomeration and giving resources at the lowest level, subsidiarity. of
Subsidiary
resources. Yeah.
control of resources,
Local ownership, local control.
local control of ownership. Wow. These permanent deacons are fabulous. I'm telling you, they get theology much more recently than I do. I have to scramble to catch up with them. I'm always scared to preach in the presence of a permanent deacon. Of a permanent deacon, that's right. I was a transitional deacon. So there you go. Distributism, local control of goods, and respective subsidiarity, which means top authority does not unduly come into the local level, that local control is respected, and subsidiarity and the higher level of authority and control does not come in unless absolutely needed or called upon. The poor have a right to this world's goods. There has to be a reasonable distribution of this world's goods. Well, what that is, how do you do that? That's another thing. Holy Mother Church, a lot of times, just gives general principles and throws the ball at the court of the local authorities and says, we're not going to give you details, you carry it out. Next section is investment in money. Here, they're not talking about the stock market when it says investments, that's what I thought, but I think capital development, that is building buildings that house businesses inside. Investing in that building could be agricultural too. It should be done orientated toward providing employment. Common good must be kept in mind. Private property is upheld here. It's okay, not wrong. And it's a positive thing, contributing to self-expression and providing people with the opportunity of exercising a role in society. Private ownership and public ownership can exist side by side, not mutually exclusive. Public property can be appropriated by competent authority for the common good and accompanied by adequate compensation, eminent domain. Highway goes through, you got to move out of your house, but you're adequately compensated. That's okay. Also, the state can prevent people from abusing their private property to the detriment of the common good, for instance, pollution, and they can blow the whistle on that. Quote, by its nature, private property has a social dimension which is based on the law of common destination of earthly goods. Whenever the social aspect is forgotten, ownership can often become the object of greed and a source of serious disorder, and its opponents easily find a pretext for calling the right itself into question. Translation, when the social aspect of private property, private ownership goes too far into greed and acquisitiveness and to the detriment of others, what happens is you wind up encouraging revolution and insurrection, that your opponents attack private ownership and private property per se, because it's being abused. I mean, your opponents don't make the distinction. There's just these captains of industry and whatever. And we had that in the United States with the rise of Andrew Carnegie and the rise of the factories with child labor and the coal mines, of course. The movie Molly McGuire's great movie goes into that, where there was not a living wage, and the company store would control everything. You were always in debt. Could never get out of debt. And what that does is it can encourage inadvertently terrorism or a criticism of private property altogether. So it's incumbent upon the captains of industry, the owners of great factories and companies to moderate, to do it in a moderate way that contributes to the common good and shows private ownership is something good and that it can be beneficial for the worker. The right to the living wage, again, is spoken of. The document refers to workers who, quote, receive a wage or income unworthy of a human being. They are deprived of decent living conditions and are exploited by the entrepreneurs. Incomes must be raised, working conditions improved, security and employment assured, and personal incentives to work encouraged. Since 1965, the close of the council, progress has been made in these areas, in the area of social justice. Speaking for myself, it was a wake-up call to me when we were told as pastors that you have to pay overtime. And you cannot, you can't do comp time. And we thought we could do all that because we're nonprofit, right? Wrong. Janet Jackson, HR person here at the diocese, said wrong. You're violating federal labor law and you're going to be in trouble. So you can do a flex time thing, which is a moderated comp time, but it has to be within the work week. So the janitor, has to work late Thursday night removing snow. Then you can say, well, come in 3 hours late tomorrow. That can be done. But once past the week, you can't do that. You have to pay comp time. So that was a wake-up call to all of us. As Christians, here I'm going to close up this way. As Christians, we're to be confident that we can bring a lot to the table for the improvement of the world. We can change the environment. We can make a difference for the better. I wonder how many of the world's social improvements of which I have spoken of the last 50 years are attributable to believers as opposed to atheists and agnostics. Probably a lot to Christians and other believers. And I will end with this quote: all who in obedience to Christ seek first the kingdom of God will derive from it a stronger and purer motivation for helping all their brothers and sisters and for accomplishing the task of justice under the inspiration of charity. Take Loris. Yeah.